Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into the history of Alien 3 on the Super Nintendo, one of the darker and more atmospheric licensed games of the early 90s. Along the way, we'll look back at the first Alien game, the very different versions of Aliens across multiple systems, the arcade adaptations, and even touch on the latest entry in the series, Alien, Rogue Incursion, and of course, if you're enjoying these videos, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below sharing your memories of Alien 3 and the Alien games in general. Also, let us know which game you'd like us to cover next. Now, let's get started.
Great movie has now become an exciting new video game, Alien. One of the new games of the century from 20th Century Fox.
The first Alien game actually dates back to 1982, developed by Fox Video Games for the Atari 2600. Now, you might be surprised. It wasn't a horror-driven action game. Instead, it borrowed heavily from Pac-Man. Players guided a crew member through hallways, avoiding xenomorphs while clearing dots, or, in this case, eggs. While it seems odd now, it was one of the earliest attempts to translate the horror and tension of Ridley Scott's 1979 film into a video game format. It didn't make waves critically, but it showed the potential of adapting the franchise for games. Things got more interesting with Aliens, based on James Cameron's 1986 film. Here's where it gets fun, because this title was adapted for several platforms, and each version played differently. On the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum, released in 1986 by Electric Dream Software, the game was a side-scrolling action title with levels based on key scenes from the movie. The Amstrad CPC version also followed this side-scrolling structure, but had different visuals and pacing, making it feel distinct despite sharing the name. Then there was this MSX version, which had unique mechanics compared to the European releases. It leaned a bit more into strategic elements, blending action with slower-paced gameplay. The arcade version of Aliens, developed by Konami in 1990, was an entirely different beast. It was a fast-paced run-and-gun shooter where players took control of Ripley and blasted through hordes of xenomorphs. This arcade machine became a fan favorite for its colorful graphics, huge boss fights, and high-octane action. It leaned much closer to Contra than survival horror, which made sense given Konami's style at the time. So, when people say they played Aliens back in the day, it really depends on which system they had, because each one was almost like its own game. Now, let's move on to the main event, Alien 3 on the Super Nintendo. Released in 1993 and developed by Probe Entertainment, this adaptation took major liberties compared to the film. While the movie was slower paced and focused on atmosphere, the Super Nintendo game dropped you into an action-packed side-scrolling shooter, armed with weapons Ripley never had in the film, including pulse rifles and flamethrowers. The goal was to rescue prisoners on the Fiorina 161 penal colony while fending off endless waves of xenomorphs. Levels were non-linear, with multiple objectives and a timer that added to the tension. The SNES version stood out because of its detailed graphics, eerie music, and emphasis on exploration. It felt less like a straight shooter and more like a mix between Metroid and Contra. Interestingly, Alien 3 came out on several different platforms, and each one was unique. The Sega Genesis, also known as the Mega Drive version, was faster and leaned more heavily into pure run-and-gun action. Levels were more linear, and the pace was closer to arcade-style gameplay. On the original Nintendo, Alien 3 was a simpler side-scroller with less detail, but still managed to deliver surprisingly fun gameplay given the hardware limitations. There was also a Game Boy version, which took the same premise but in black and white with scaled-back levels. Despite the downgrade in visuals, it kept the core concept of rescuing prisoners under a time limit. Meanwhile, the Amiga version offered yet another take, often remembered for its moody atmosphere and crisp graphics. So, just like with Aliens, the version you played shaped your memories of the game. Though not directly tied to the Super Nintendo version, Alien 3, the gun was released in arcades in 1993 by Sega. This was a light gun shooter where players used mounted guns to blast their way through alien-infested environments. While it shared the Alien 3 branding, it had more in common with the Alien's action style than the film it was supposedly based on. As for sales, Alien 3 on the Super Nintendo sold moderately well, though it wasn't a blockbuster hit. Probe Entertainment had a reputation for licensed games, and while critics praised the atmosphere and gameplay variety, some felt it strayed too far from the film. Still, it has a cult following today, especially among fans of challenging Super Nintendo action titles. Probe Entertainment, the studio behind the Super Nintendo version, worked on several other notable licensed games before and after Alien 3. These included ports of Mortal Kombat to home consoles, the Die Hard trilogy, and even Disney's Aladdin for the Sega Game Gear and Master System. They had a knack for making the most out of limited hardware and creating memorable experiences, even when working under the restrictions of movie tie-ins. Comparing Alien 3 to other titles, it sits somewhere between Metroid and Contra. Like Metroid, it had exploratory elements and a dark sci-fi atmosphere. But like Contra, it demanded fast reflexes and rewarded aggressive play. Modern fans might also see similarities to indie action titles that blend exploration and survival, such as Axiom Verge. The Aliens franchise didn't just inspire video games. Dark Horse Comics ran a long line of Aliens comics that expanded the universe beyond the films. Some storylines even influenced later games. While Alien 3 itself didn't spawn direct anime adaptations, the franchise's reach across pop culture is undeniable. And the legacy continues. A brand new game, Alien Rogue Incursion Evolved Edition, is on the horizon.
Deadly. Relentless. Unstoppable.
Promising modern visuals, intense survival mechanics, and a return to the franchise's horror roots, it shows just how enduring the Alien name is in gaming. Seeing how far we've come from the Atari 2600's maze chases to fully immersive modern survival horror really puts things in perspective. That wraps up our look at Alien 3 on the Super Nintendo and the history surrounding the Alien games. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below telling us your memories of this title. What version did you play? Was it the Super Nintendo, Genesis, or maybe even the arcade light gun game? And let us know which game you'd like us to cover next. Click on one of the videos on the screen to keep watching, and as always, thank you for joining us.